All right. Sorry about that. We just came on William's platform, as I was saying, that you probably didn't hear. And we're reaching out to multiple channels on Facebook and YouTube. William Nighthawk invited us on his platform. So Midwest Night Watchers is going to be on there introducing new shows and new guests. And hopefully we'll be able to reach a bigger crowd. And tonight, as usual, I got Chiro.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
So tonight we have a special guest, D.A. Roberts, and he has his own podcast and Facebook and everything, and esteemed author. And he established himself as an author and a researcher and a dog man and all kinds of cryptid. And we're going to bring him on and talk about all of his adventures. Welcome, DA.
Welcome, DA.
Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
So you got a new book coming out, and we thought we would discuss that tonight along with all your cryptid adventures and stuff and see where this show leads us.
Sounds good to me. Well, the new book, it's been out a couple of weeks. It's called Dark Frontiers First Hunt. And it's cryptid horror. It's set in 1865, just as the Civil War is coming to an end, and it's about a group of cryptid hunters that are trying to protect settlers. And it's, like I said, it takes place in 1865. I had to do a whole lot of research on the old black powder pistols, old percussion caps, because it's very different than modern stories where they've got magazines and it's easy to reload. But back in the day when everything was black powder, it was a touch slower. So I had to really dig into the research on this one, and I'm happy to say it debuted at #1 on Western Horror. And
Wow.
it's still doing really well. It's developed quite a following all on its own. It was number 29 of books in print for me, and it's brought a lot of attention to some of the other series as well. It's bringing in a whole new group of readers because it's my first Western. But there are plans for many more because those characters in that Western seem to be really popular.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a Western horror fiction category.
There are a lot of categories that would surprise you out there. There really are.
So after I heard you announce your book on your show, I went up and looked it up and was reading reviews, and you got great reviews from people on those Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all over. Everybody was just loving that book and the characters.
I was pretty happy with that. I mean, like I said, I was really nervous about that one, as I've written plenty of like military style fiction and I write a lot of cryptid stuff, but I'd never done anything set in the Old West, and I wanted to do it right. And when I research a subject, I really dig into the subject. I mean, I even went so far as to look up slang from during the Civil War because I wanted the language to have the authentic feel. I wanted them to use the same terms they would use. I didn't want to pepper it with modern phrases when nobody would have spoke like that way back then. So I really kind of immersed myself in that time period and really absolutely enjoyed it. It was a fun ride. The book was really easy to write because once I sat down to write it, I had these characters so firmly established in my head. It was basically just like letting them run with the story and writing down what I saw. And it was one of the easier novels that I've actually written. I wrote it in about a month.
Wow.
And I think the sequel is going to be about the same. When I started it, it's going to be one of those ones that it's easy to let the characters drive the action because I've already established these characters so well in my head.
Right. And now, without giving away a lot of the book, he was a rebel soldier, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his name's Declan Kane, Irish immigrant turned soldier, and at the end of the war winds up getting dragged in to a new group that the U.S. Marshals are putting together to hunt monsters that are hunting people as they expand west.
And the monsters that he had fought off monsters before he got recruited, right? You
Right.
said that's why he got recruited, because of him and the other monsters.
Right, he had run into the Cherokee call him the Ulonga Doglala, which is basically their version of Dogman. But the phrase dogman didn't exist in 1865. And, in fact, people have only been using the term dogman for like 15 or 20 years. But those creatures were still described. I mean, some of the earliest dogman-like creatures that were described came from accounts that go back to the Roman legion, that go back to the ancient Greeks, the cynocephalus. So they've been being seen historically for a long time. Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus both documented seeing dog-headed creatures on their journeys. And even in like the LBL area, sightings in that area go back to French trappers in the 1690s. So him encountering these creatures was kind of a foregone conclusion, but I couldn't call them by modern names. I couldn't use terms like Bigfoot or Dogman. I
Right.
had to dig back and find what they would have been called in those days.
So I'm assuming as you said you're going to write sequels to this, that you're going to start going into more cryptids for him
Right.
to encounter.
Absolutely. Pretty much anything that you've heard a cryptid story on, they're going to run into at some point.
That'll be an interesting series. That'll be cool.
It's a lot of fun to write. I mean, so far it's been very popular. I just pulled it up over on Amazon. It's in the top 15 in 3 categories,
Oh,
which
wow.
it's been out almost a month, and I'm astounded that it's still ranked so high on Amazon. It's number 2 in Western horror fiction, number 8 in occult horror, number 14 in occult fiction.
Wow.
Overall on Amazon,
Wow.
it's like 3,400. So it's still ranked very high. Out of like 7,000 current titles available, well, not 7,000, 7 million titles currently available on Amazon, it's like 3,400.
That's amazing.
I'm just absolutely astounded. I mean, it took off more than any other book I've ever released, and I'm not saying that I'm not proud of my other novels, but I'm really proud of this one because it took me by surprise.
Wow. Yeah, I imagine your followers on your other series probably jumped right on this and just fell in love with it.
I've been getting a lot of great feedback. I've got a group that I call my alpha readers, and it's a little over a dozen people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, scattered all over the country. And as I write a manuscript, I'll finish a chapter, I will send it to them before the book is even done. So I've got people that are already proofreading and looking for conflicts in the story or plot holes or anything. I've already got a dozen people or so trying to make the manuscript better before I'm even done writing it. And I think it's really streamlined the process. It allows me to get real time feedback as I'm writing, and it really helps me keep the books where I want them to be. The level of quality that I can put out because of them is much higher than if I was trying to do it all by myself.
Wow, cool. Now, did your investigations into the cryptid, is that how this book came about, as a thought in your head, or did you already know it, you were going to write this book?
Like I said, I didn't know I was going to write Western until just a few months ago. A thought had never really even entered my head. I like Westerns. I grew up watching Westerns, but I've always liked writing horror stories. And I've been into cryptids since I'd probably say the mid 70s when I saw the Patterson Gimlin film for the first time. Of course, I bugged my mom until she bought me all those Time Life books that were like Time Life, different monsters like Bigfoot and the Yeti. And I had a whole stack of those as a kid. And of course, the old Leonard Nimoy In Search Ofs, watched all of those growing up. And it really got me into cryptids as a very young kid. Of course, growing up on a farm, I was always in the woods. We were hunting, fishing, camping. We were always out doing something. And there were a number of times where of course, as a kid, you've got an active imagination. I was convinced there was something out there, and the rest of my family was like, "No, you're fine. Quit worrying about it." But my mother's sister, my Aunt Violet, after she divorced, she remarried, and she married my Uncle Buddy. My Uncle Buddy was full blood Cherokee. He married into the family, but he became quickly like a second dad to me. And he owned a section of land. I don't know if you're familiar where Lake of the Ozarks is in Missouri.
Yes.
He owned about 170 acres, right up against about 5,000 acres of conservation land on the backside of Lake of the Ozarks between Lebanon and the lake. When I say he lived in the sticks, he lived in the sticks. I grew up on a farm. His closest neighbor was like 2.5 miles away, and that's as the crow flies, not even by the road. He lived in
Wow.
the middle of nowhere. And we spent a lot of time out there. I used to deer hunt out on that land. I hunted fish. We'd go out and do fish fries and everything out on his land because it was so remote. I mean, you could camp out there for a week and nobody'd ever see you. But we were out at his place one time, and I had to have been 8, maybe 9 years old. And of course, at that point, I would ask everybody in the family if they'd ever seen Bigfoot or anything like that. And but one day I was out there, like I said, he was full blood Cherokee. He waited till everybody was outside. And he picked me up and he set me on his leg and he said, he called me by my first name. I go by DA now, so I don't usually tell people my first name anymore. If the only time I ever hear my first and middle name is when my wife's mad. But he set me on his leg and he called me by my name. He said, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to listen. I said, okay. He said, the things you keep talking about are called the Sul Kalu. They are out here. I've seen them. And you need to be very careful when you get away from the house because they are out here.
Hmm.
And he saw
Wow.
them many times on his land.
See, I was about the same as you growing up. I'd get scholastic books, on the mummified people, and they had some on Bigfoot and UFOs. My mom and dad kept asking me, why are you buying these UFO books? We give you money to read books. I said, well, that's because that's what I like. They're cool.
Absolutely. I read pretty much anything on a weird subject, be it like Loch Ness Monster, UFOs. I read everything I could get my hands on. They all knew me at the public library and at the school library, always coming in and looking for those. Of course, at the same time, I was growing up on a farm. I read pretty much anything I could get my hands on anyway. By the time I was in first and second grade, I was already reading books like Louis L'Amour because that's what my mother read. I was a big Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey fan as a kid, and of course, as I got older, I got into other subjects like I read J.R.R. Tolkien, and I read a lot of biographies. But growing up on a farm in the '70s, when you got on a good day, you got 2 channels. I didn't watch much TV. So I pretty much always had my nose stuck in a book, and I'm more like that even today than I am more watching television. I don't watch a whole lot of TV. I spend a lot of time working on my books, and then I like to do research as well and other subjects. So I'm always digging into something, looking into the mystery behind something.
That's cool. Yeah, my grandparents had farms on my mom's side and dad's side, both outside our little town that we live in here. And so as a kid, I was out there all the time. And during the summer, they'd ship me off to one of them. I don't know if it was mom and dad trying to get rid of me or that was just them trying to develop me to not live in the town all the time. But my brothers and sisters, late at night coming back from the farm would always talk about Bigfoot or something, like seeing it, and scaring the crap out of me. And back then in the '70s, there actually was Bigfoot on the radio, where they talk about people having sightings or UFOs. They'd actually report it then. So I didn't know if they were pulling my leg or it was real. I had to believe it was real when they were, my older brother and sisters were telling me this stuff. Then growing up, I kind of wondered, well, maybe they were just kidding or trying to scare me. Now I'm looking into all this stuff. I said, well, maybe they actually did see something. I don't know.
It's hard to say. I mean, they may have. I mean, right about the time I first started getting into Bigfoot in the mid '70s was right after the Momo the Monster scare happened up in Louisiana, Missouri. That was in 1972. Of course, that was about the time that the Legend of Boggy Creek came out. All the stuff that had been happening down in Falk, Arkansas. So Bigfoot was big in the news a lot back then, and people didn't necessarily come forward as much to tell their stories because generally, if you saw somebody, he had interviewed on TV because they had a Bigfoot sighting, it was like the same guy with the bibbed overalls with one strap undone that talked about the tornado hitting his trailer park. It was always those guys that got interviewed. So, nobody really took it too terribly seriously. And when the news did do a subject on it, it was always done a little tongue in cheek. But I don't really think it's really that way anymore. I mean, a lot of the sightings reports I take are coming from professionals, judges, lawyers, guys that don't want to go on the record because it could affect their career. I know a lot of cops that have had sightings that like, hey, I'm going to tell you this story, but you keep my name out of it because I've got to go back and work at this department. I've gathered some really fantastic stories over the last 30, 40 years, not just from, hillbillies that I grew up with, but from professional people, former law enforcement, a sitting judge a couple of times. I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of walks of life that have had encounters with these things. So I can't go with the commonly held belief that everybody's just making it up. I mean, there's just there's we've sent people to death row on eyewitness testimony, but when eyewitnesses are talking about Bigfoot, all of that now goes out the window. You can't say everybody's lying. There's just way too
Right.
many people have seen it.
Yeah, it's amazing now, just like you said, that we're starting to get credible witnesses, airplane pilots, military pilots, like you said, business professionals, people that you would hold up in society as being truthful and honorable. So now all of a sudden, instead of being whispered in the back of bars or smoking rooms, you're hearing these stories out in front. People are actually coming out and talking about it and giving it credibility.
Mhm. One of the better stories I've collected, when I was still a deputy, I went to training at another department, and it was down in Arkansas, and I was talking to some of the guys there, and you got to be kind of careful about who you bring the subject of Bigfoot up around cops, because a lot of guys are just like, oh, that's bullshit. I don't want to. Oh, sorry about that. That's BS. I don't want to talk about that. I can't believe you even brought that up. But then you run into guys that are especially the guys. I would kind of gauge it to see who'd spent a lot of time deer hunting. Because the guys that have spent a lot of time at deer camp have heard these stories or had stories of their own. Guys that when that all they were ever were as cops, they never spent a lot of time out in the woods. Rarely have those stories unless they went to a call that had something unexplainable. But I ran into an old boy down in Arkansas, and he said, I'll tell you a story. He said, this story will freak you out. He said, but you've got to promise me you don't ever reveal my name, because it can cost me dearly in my department. It'll ruin my credibility on a witness stand. I said, hey man, 100%. I won't ever tell anybody who you are. So he tells me this story, and he went out deer hunting. Got out there early one morning, and this was in the Ozark National Forest down by what's that, Beaver Lake, I believe it is. He gets out to his deer stand. He said he'd been hunting the same spot for years. Gets up in his deer stand. He said he was probably 12, 13 feet off the ground, one of those climbing stands. And he had a soft-sided lunchbox with a strap on it. He tied it around his leg so it wouldn't fall. And he dozed off in the deer stand. And because he said it was still hours to go before daylight, he was just kind of nodding off. Well, he said he woke up with something tugging on that lunchbox. And he said it opened my eyes and flipped on his little headlamp, and this thing was standing right at the front of his deer stand with its head about level with his knee. He said the thing had to be 8.5, 9 feet tall. And he said it was just looking right at me. He said I could have just reached out and put my hand on its head. It was that close. And he said it was tugging on my lunchbox. I said, what'd you do? He said, I untied it and I let it have the lunchbox. And he said it walked away with the lunchbox. I said, what'd you do after that? He goes, once I was convinced it was gone, I climbed down out of that tree. I left the woods and I went home. And the next day I sold my deer hunting equipment and I haven't been back. If you want that deer stand, I'll tell you where it's at, but I'm not going back for it.
Wow.
He says, as far as I know, it's still out there in the woods.
And that's the thing. You wonder how many people have actually been, hunters and been out there and encountered things, and we don't ever get to hear about it. I mean, there could be some awesome stories out there.
Yeah, a lot of people just will not come forward because they don't want to either one be made fun of or called a liar, or they get things to lose. I mean, some of these guys have only told me these stories that as long as I promise to never reveal their actual name.
Now, did he describe it in detail about what it looked like?
Yeah. Yeah, he said that it was dark haired. Of course, he said it was dark outside. And he said it was very broadly built, thick built. He said it didn't move so much like a person. He said it had kind of a lumbering gait to it. He said, but as it was walking away, it was holding the lunchbox in one hand and its arm hung like he said the hand was almost to its knee. And he said it had kind of the way it walked was kind of more of a glide. He said it didn't bounce like people did. It just kind of did this gliding walk. He said it never fully extended its knees. And he said the features were like somewhere between a person and a gorilla. He said the nose was wide and flat. thick brow ridge, and the forehead. He said it angled back. I said like a sagittal crest. He goes, I don't know what that is, but so I showed him a picture of a gorilla. He goes, yeah, kind of like that, but not quite as steep. He said it was just
Wow.
it was there. He said it just looked at me, and I looked at it, and I knew what it wanted, and I wasn't about to argue with it. And he said if it was really that hungry for a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, he was getting them.
Wow.
Yep, you give them whatever they want.
I said, did the thought ever go through your mind of shooting it? He said, I was carrying a 223, and there ain't no way in hell I was going to shoot that with a 223.
Yeah, pretty big to be shooting with that.
He said, I don't think I would have done more than pissed it off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, did he notice any noise at all when it was walking away or coming forward? I mean, obviously, it didn't really necessarily wake him up till it tugged on his lunchbox.
I asked him if it made any noise or if he remembers hearing it walk or make any like grunts or anything. He said he could hear his own heartbeat in his ears so loud. He thought it was gonna beat out of his chest. He said all I could hear was like the ringing in my ears of my own heartbeat. And when by the time I calmed down when it had walked away, the only thing I could think of was get the hell out of here.
Oh,
He
yeah.
said, I didn't try to figure out where it went. I didn't look for tracks. He said, as soon as I thought it was safe, I climbed down out of that tree and made a beeline for my truck.
Yep. Usually fight or flight, and you're not going to fight that.
No, thank you. I have no desire to be the guy who brings a body in. I don't want that headache. I don't even want to try it. I always go armed whenever we go out and we go to places where there's been sightings, or we go out in the Mark Twain National Forest and see what we can find. But I always go armed. But I would be the last person to want to shoot one. I don't have any desire to bring the body in. I don't want to be that guy, and I would only shoot one if it was a self-defense situation. I'm not going to actively go out and hunt one. Same thing with Dogman. I have no plans to shoot one. The only way I will open fire on one's in self-defense or the defense of somebody else.
Right.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
Val in chat is asking if the guy was, did he recognize the smell?
He said the only smell he was convinced he was smelling was him about to crap his own pants.
Okay. No
He said he didn't
sulfur or
smell
anything.
it. He said he didn't smell it. He couldn't tell you what it sounded like. He did say it had wide, flat teeth. Only it had like big canines.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm the same way. I like those stories where people talk about how they've lived with, Sasquatch in their area the whole time. They're basically just friendly, you leave them alone, they leave you alone, and once in a while you trade gifts or something. I'd rather have something like that than actually, be the guy that wants to go out and hunt them and have fortune and fame for bringing in a Sasquatch or Dogman or whatever.
Yeah, that's never going to be me. I have no desire to go out and actively hunt one. And I think it's much like any other animal. I think they're smart enough to understand that if you're trying to do them an injury, you're probably not going to see one. I mean, look how scarce deer get when it gets close to deer season. 3 days before deer season, they're freaking everywhere. But you get out in your deer stand and you're lucky to see one the entire day. The animals are smarter than people give them credit for, and these things are no different. I mean, if we're going to accept the fact that they're out there, which I 100%, I 100% believe they're out there. If we're going to accept that the fact they're out there, we've got to give them credit. We've got to understand that they are the masters of their domain. They grew up, they evolved there. We are never going to outmatch them in their own territory. It would be like somebody coming in off the street trying to know your house better than you. It's not going to happen. But I think that they're very good at sensing intent. If you go out looking to hurt one, you're probably never going to see one.
Right. We've discovered that in just being out in our backyard, like we were telling you earlier, we have like 50 acres behind us of open field, and most of the time it's full of wheat or usually corn every year. So we'll sit out there, we'll just have a fire and we'll look up at the sky, and that's how we got our video footage, or Jane did, of some what we think are UFOs. We don't really know, they're objects, but we do the same thing with them as we would with trying to not attract, but get the sense of Sasquatch. We send out good intentions. We don't want to harm anybody. We just want to know the existence. And if they want to be friendly, okay, maybe we'll get lucky and we'll see one, but I don't know necessarily in our backyard, but we'll have traces of it or something. So I think they do have intent because we've seen flashes in the sky just after we've made that known. We've
Mhm.
just let it out that we don't have any hard feelings or intentions of hurting you. We just want to know of your existence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think it's the same with cryptids. I think you're going to get what you put out there. If you
Right.
go out there with the intent to do violence, you're probably going to run into violence.
Mm-hmm.
Violence begets violence. It just always does. That's why the best results I've ever had, especially camping, has just been going out, setting up camp, and being quiet. I tell people all the time, if you're going to go into a research area and you're going to go out there and look for any kind of sign, the first thing you should do is go out there, sit down, and be quiet for 45 minutes to an hour. Let everything around you get used to you being there. Because if you go out there and just start tromping around making all kinds of noise, you're not going to see anything, not even wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's amazing how quiet you think you are, but you're not actually.
Yeah, we are like, like a steamroller rolling through the woods compared to what we think we are. We make way more noise than any animal out there.
And that's what's amazing about something like Sasquatch or even Dogman or any of the cryptids. People don't necessarily hear them coming unless they're trying to warn you or scare you off. Then you'll definitely hear them make noise. But can you imagine? I mean, I know you can, but I just can't imagine something 9 foot tall, 12 foot tall, being able to walk through the forest and not hardly make a sound at all.
Well, it's born to that environment. Um, just like every deer I've ever shot in my life, I only saw it because it moved. If it's laying down in the bushes, as long as it's sitting still, you're probably not going to see it unless you just got absolute eagle eyes. Every deer I've ever got, I got because it moved. Um, so if it's smart enough to understand that, and stays absolutely still. Well, it's like the end of the movie Harry and the Hendersons, and yes, that was a kids movie, and but the end of that movie when they're letting Harry go back out in the woods, that was not trick photography. All those people that were in costumes that were the other Bigfoot were already there. If you go back and pause that and look, you can see them if you know what you're looking for. It's only when they move that you see them. It wasn't done with a
Mm-hmm.
trick of the camera. They did that on purpose. They said just stay absolutely still until you hear your cue, and then everybody turn around at the same time. So there's a lot to be said for just remaining motionless. Our eyes are evolved to track motion. Uh, and we look for patterns and we look for motion, and that's what gives things away. Uh, and when things aren't moving and they don't fit a pattern that we're expecting to see in our head, we'll just walk. We'll just pass right over it.
Yeah, I remember when we used to go out to Uncle Oren's. He had like a 50 acre, 100 acres of pasture and about 1,000 acres or more of a farmland, and they had those meadows and stuff, pastures in between all the fields. And me and my best friend, which actually would have been his nephew, we just called him Uncle Oren, or I did, but we would go out squirrel hunting, and we were going down the cow paths, or even it might have been a deer track, but it was a cow path definitely. And we're just sitting there, we're squirrel hunting, and we're looking up in the trees and stuff, not thinking of anything. Then all of a sudden, the farm dog just stopped still and was staring. So we thought, okay, what's over there? We slowly turn, and there's the biggest old deer I've ever seen in my life. It looked like a giant elk with a big beard and big giant rack. And here we are with 22s hunting squirrels. Not that it was in season, we would have shot it anyway, but it's just amazing. It stood still, and we stood still and just stared at each other. Then all of a sudden, the dog moved, and it just jumped, and it was gone.
Wow.
Yeah, they're amazingly quick.
So that was another thing. We're just walking down the path, and we never even would have saw it there if it wasn't for the dog.
Sometimes it's like that. I mean, sometimes you walk up on something. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone out turkey hunting and literally walked up on a group of turkeys because they were all hunkered down. That's a butt puckering moment when suddenly you've got feathers flying and turkeys are coming out of the bushes all around you. If you're not expecting it, that's a brown pants moment for sure. But you can sometimes walk up on stuff in the woods and it just absolutely frighten the crap out of you because you weren't expecting it. And I've kicked deer up that were hunkered down for the night. Been out looking for. I was out looking for a buddy's dog one time when his coon dogs got out and we couldn't find it. And I was walking down this trail and scared up a doe, and she popped up out of the bushes no more than 10 feet from me, and it was almost a shake it out of my pant leg moment because I didn't know what was coming out of those bushes.
Wow.
And yeah, I was, thump, 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 thump. But it was just a deer. But at the same time, you don't know it's there until you're almost on top of it. That will scare the crap out of you. And animals will surprise you. They're very, very good at hiding because they're adapted to that environment. It's easy to spot a deer when it's walking through your backyard in the open, but you get out in the thick of the woods, especially some of these woods like the Mark Twain National Forest or the Ozark National Forest, where it is very thick. You could be 10 feet away from one and never see it.
Yeah, we go out pheasant hunting or even a quail. Quail and all of them would fly away from you. About 5 or 6 of them or whatever, however many they are, they'd fly away and fan out.
Mm-hmm.
But then pheasants, you don't know which way they're going to go. Sometimes they'll charge you, be running on the ground before they fly, and they're coming right at you. Just scare the snot right out of you.
It's weird how they react sometimes.
Well, how many times would we go in the backyard and when it's pitch dark and all of a sudden you hear this strange noise? Well, we come to find out it's deer back there snorting at us. It's quiet and pitch dark. There's this whew, and I'm thinking, what is that? And I get a flashlight, and sure enough, they're deer. But the first time you hear that noise, it's just like, what in the world is in the field?
I went camping with a bunch of buddies of mine up in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, and it was still fairly early, and I was going to bed. I'd worked all day the day before, and we hiked in, and I was tired. I was like, guys, I'm going to bed, and they were all sitting around the campfire. I was probably 21 at the time, and they're all just sitting around talking and having a few beers, and I was crawling into my sleeping bag. And all of a sudden, I hear them just going crazy, like, "Oh my God!" And I'm like, "What? What are you idiots talking about?" They're like, "Get out here! We think we just heard Bigfoot." I'm like, "Okay." So I crawl back out of the sleep bag, and I go out there and I listen. I'm like, "Listen, you'll hear it." And then in the distance, I heard what they thought was Bigfoot. I'm like, "For the love of God, have none of you guys ever heard an elk bugle before?" That is an elk.
Yeah.
Stop freaking out. It's an elk. Of course, those were the same idiots when we were walking a trail. We kept hearing. I'm like, I hear a bear. I'm like, I don't hear anything. I'm like, I tell you, I hear a bear. And we rounded a corner on the trail, and there was a grizzly bear. I mean, I could have reached my dog. I'll reach out and pop him on the nose. I'll go boop and hit him on the nose. I could have done that to the bear. We were almost nose to nose. And I said,
wow.
whatever you do, don't run. And of course, behind me, I hear. And I'm the only one now standing here nose to nose with that bear. And for whatever reason, it wasn't hungry or, it wasn't in a bad mood, but it looked at me and I looked at it and we just kind of went our separate ways. But if I'd have got between it and a cub, or if it'd been right before hibernation, it would have killed me. But I was literally close enough. I could have reached out and popped it on the nose. And
wow.
Very, very happy that went the way it went, because, I would have been a missing 411 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm assuming your channel is a lot about cryptids, and we watch you all the time, but you talk mostly about dogmen, right? Is that what your encounters are, or your investigations?
We'll dig into just about anything. I mean, I've spent time in LBL. I've spent so much time in the woods. I mean, I'm practically part tree, I think. But there's so many places you can investigate, and there's so much out there. And the Ozarks are just full of folklore. I mean, dating back for hundreds of years, this area is just full of rich histories and strange tales like the Ozarks Howler. There's all kinds of folklore out here. So I can't say I've really focused on any one particular cryptid, although Bigfoot's always going to be near and dear to my heart. But we will look into about anything, and especially if there's local sightings. Yeah, I've spent Oh, I think I started seriously going out, spending time camping and looking into stuff like this. I think 1983, 84, somewhere around in there.
Now, was there an incident? I don't know if you said it earlier, an incident that got you started doing your podcast or going out and investigating yourself?
Well,
Or is
yeah,
this something you're just interested forever, like you said, as a kid growing up?
I kind of was just investigating for my own purposes. I wasn't part of any organization or anything like that for years and years. And as a cop, I kind of kept that part of my life very quiet. Because you don't want to people think you're crazy. You don't want to get on the
Mhm.
witness stand and have some defense attorney go, "Oh, you're a Bigfoot hunter, are you?" Because it'll destroy your credibility on the stand, and you don't. Then you've got cases getting overturned. So I was very quiet and very close to the chest about investigating cryptids and Bigfoot and stuff like that while I was still a cop. But I've been retired for a few years now, and now I've got my podcast, and I can be very vocal about my beliefs and my research. But yeah, even when I was still a cop, though, I was very much into it. It was just one of those things where I had to keep it more on the down low. And I think I've investigated personally probably 2,500 to 3,000 sightings
Oh,
over the
wow.
last
Wow.
30, 40
Wow.
years.
So you got lots of
Um,
stories then.
Talk to a lot of people, and you start noticing commonalities. If you talk to, I've talked to a lot of deer hunters. In fact, one of my co-hosts, Anthony Canatella, his sighting is very similar to a dozen others that I've documented. Uh, Hunters all the time are saying, I had this thing in my sights, and Anthony did. He was on an airboat in the swamp in Georgia, and he saw something at the edge of the trees, and he put his crosshairs on it. And yeah, he said, I saw this thing 100% in my sights. And I know a lot of deer hunters who've had the same thing. I saw this thing in my sights, and it just looked too human to take the shot.
Mm.
Of course, then you get the missing 411 hunters cases where hunters have gone missing in the woods, armed hunters. And I think the difference is, I think those hunters did take the shot. I think they attempted
Wow.
to put one
Mhm.
down and they came after him.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
And I firmly believe there are cryptids that are dangerous. I'm not saying they all are. There are lots of cases, especially you look back through Native American lore, where they, like for example, the Lakota. The word for Bigfoot is Shiatanka. Shiatanka basically means big elder brother. They just saw the Lakota just saw them as another tribe. They trade with them even in the bad winters. Then you've got
Hmm.
others like the Cherokee who call it the Sewell Kaloo, and the Sewell Kaloo is not in any way, shape, or form considered something friendly. There are a lot of native tribes up in the Pacific Northwest that talk about these things coming into their camps at night and stealing women and children.
Mm.
So there are lots of stories of human predation by cryptids out there, especially up in Alaska. A lot of very dangerous cryptid encounters have happened up there. But for every one you hear that was violent, you'll hear 4 or 5 that weren't. So
Mhm.
yes, I do believe there are dangerous elements, just like there are dangerous elements among humans. We have serial killers among humans, but
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean every person is bad. Um, I think that there are creatures out there that can and will kill you if they get the chance, especially creatures like the Gugway. I don't think there's really a good encounter with a Gugway. I think Gugway are just predators. But then you've got other ones that are very much like Harry and the Henderson type stories. Like
Mhm.
I ran into this thing in the woods, and there were stories from loggers. There was a logger in Canada that a tree fell on it, and one of these creatures came out and lifted the tree off of him, saved his life. Then there
Wow.
there are other stories where people have had their children, like in the missing 411 cases. Kid went around a corner on the trail and was never seen again. The missing 411s are I find intriguing, especially when they start talking about tracking dogs that will not track. I spent a lot of time
Hmm.
working with dogs in law enforcement. I was never a dog handler, but I've worked with the dog handlers a lot. For those dogs to refuse to track is unheard of. Those dogs cannot wait to get out of the vehicle and start a track. So when these dogs that are trained to track people refuse to do it, there's a major problem. They're smelling something they don't know what it is and they want no part of. And these are dogs that are not afraid of man or beast. They'll go after a bear, they'll go after a mountain lion, they'll go after any animal you can name. But for them to just pull up and go, done, nope, getting in the truck, that is something that terrifies them. And that, to me, those are the ones that really stick in my head.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I believe that too. That you have friendly species. Not that they couldn't hurt you or kill you in one little swipe. Because just look at a 9 to 12 foot Sasquatch or even a dog man. But you hear these stories where people talk about dog man have been in their area and they never hurt the family or anything, and you hear the opposite from other people. So I don't know if it's territorial or wrong place, wrong time.
It's hard to say. I mean, we don't really have enough data to say what's causing these things to act the way they are. But in some places, they are just violent. The stories coming out of LBL, all violent. You don't hear friendly
Mhm.
encounters coming out of LBL. Taylor, Mississippi, where the siege at Lockett Ranch happened. Even today, we're getting stories out of their truckers who are being harassed in their trucks on the side of the road at night. Animals
Oh,
being mutilated. Lots of violent encounters with dogman type creatures around Taylor, Mississippi. The Louisiana Rougarou is never described as being helpful or friendly. And to me, I think the Rougarou is just another type of dogman. Uh, Same thing with the stories of werewolves. Uh, I don't really think that the the werewolf story originated with a person that turned into a wolf. I think it was a very primitive attempt to explain what dogmen were. We know from historical records that both the Romans and the Greeks encountered what they called the cynocephalus, and they encountered them in northern Africa, in the Indus River Valley, in India, and in China. That even today there are parts of India where they say don't go into these mountain passes because these creatures with the heads of dogs they'll kill you. Don't go up there. So we've got historical records going back thousands of years of other civilizations that have encountered these things. Like I said, Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus, both mention cynocephali in their journeys. So this is not new that we're hearing these creatures. But a lot of people, especially in the old days when science hadn't really talked about a whole lot of stuff, would look for ways to explain what these creatures are. For example, I've used this example on my show. The ancient Vikings used to believe that the aurora borealis, which we now know what it is, but back then they had no idea. So they believed that it was the light of the Bifrost Bridge reflecting off the armor of the Valkyries. And that's a really cool explanation. And they 100% believed it, but it doesn't make it true. We now know that it's electromagnetic energy that it's interfering with the upper parts of the atmosphere, and it creates these colors. They didn't know that back then. Same thing with a werewolf. They didn't know that this was another race of creature. They didn't know what it was, so they attempted to explain it. And I think that's the origin of the werewolf legend. I think that's where it comes from. I think these creatures, like Bigfoot and Dogman, I think they've been around for a very, very long time. Now I'm not. There's lots of stories where people talk about Bigfoot and Dogman being, used by the government or created in a lab. I don't think they were created in a lab, but I know our government's not above manipulating something to try to turn it into a weapon. So I don't think Dogman or Bigfoot were created by our government, but they certainly have tried to take advantage of it. I guarantee you that.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that on William's show and other shows before, where we think the same thing, whether Sasquatch or Dogmen have been here before we were, or at least when the Native Americans have been here, or whoever was in this land before we took it over, which I'm sad to say that we forced them out and took over. But I mean, our government's the same way. They don't have no feelings or compassion for anybody. So they would take an indigenous species like that and try to use it to
Exactly.
their advantage. Whether they're trying to make a super soldier out of them, I don't know, but they're definitely experimenting on them, I believe.
I do too. I think the government has been aware of these creatures for a very long time. In fact, I've got my own kind of tinfoil hat theory on that. Um, Teddy Roosevelt, in his book *The Wilderness Hunter*, wrote one of the first known accounts of a Bigfoot killing somebody, the Bauman incident,
Mm.
um, and that was recorded in Teddy's book *The Wilderness Hunter*. He wrote that book before he was president. He still had aspirations of becoming of a political career, but everybody knows Teddy was a huge outdoorsman. He spent lots of times hunting major game all over the world. He hunted Cape Buffalo in Africa. He hunted everything you could hunt in North America, including buffalo. So Teddy was a big outdoorsman. But the level of detail in that Bauman incident is incredible. I've talked to hillbillies my whole life and people who grew up in the backwoods, and you never get that level of detail. You get, they'll tell you about, the incident. They'll tell you what was going on. But he was describing the traps and how they built their camp, and those are details you just don't get from somebody. These are details you had to know. I think Roosevelt was Bauman. I truly do. Now, years later, Roosevelt did come forward and say he had a Bigfoot encounter, but that was after. When that book was first being written, he still had political aspirations. He didn't, he wasn't. I don't think he was willing to admit that the Bauman incident. I think he really was Bauman. One, Bauman's never given a first name. No, and no one ever came forward claiming to be Bauman. But again, the level of detail just leads me to believe that Teddy Roosevelt was in fact Bauman from the Bauman incident. Now, if you can accept that, and I don't think that's a huge leap of the imagination, but if you can accept that that Roosevelt was Bauman, look forward, flash forward 20 years when he's president. What's the first thing he does? One of the first things he does as president, he created the National Park Service, setting aside 83 million acres. 83 million acres of habitat that we're still not allowed full access to today.
Yep. If you wanted to hide something to keep it a secret, that's the best way to do it, is have the government rope it off and say, here you go. We're going to create this area for you, but you can't go here. For whatever reason, whatever's in there, we don't know.
How many times have you been to a national park where like this section of the park is closed? You can't go in there.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that section of the park closed? Yeah, it might be mating time for certain species or what have you, but when you look at all the missing 411s, they start shutting down areas of the park when people start going missing.
Yep, we have that in the state parks just around us, even.
Well, the national parks, 88 million or 83 million acres. That's not even counting state parks. That's right. Just national parks. That's not public use areas. That's not wildlife management areas. That is national parks alone. If you add in state parks and public recreation areas and game preserves, you add all that in, it's north of 150 million acres that have been set aside. But just national parks alone is 83 million acres.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, the Mark Twain National Forest here in Missouri runs from, I think, just south of St. Louis to the Arkansas border. And then the Ozark National Forest comes, I don't know if it actually touches the Mark Twain, but it comes very close. And the Ozark National Forest covers most of the middle part of Arkansas. Those two forests alone are 5 million acres. It's like the Mark Twain is like 2.8 million acres, and the Ozark National is like 2 million, something like that. But between the two of them, they're almost 5 million acres, and that's just right here in Missouri and Arkansas.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And that is a lot of habitat. There are people that get lost in the Ozark National Forest and the Mark Twain all the time. I mean, it's not uncommon. People get off the trail and it is easy to get lost because those areas are just so rugged. There are places out in the deep Mark Twain that there's probably not been anybody in a human in that area in 50 to 100 years. They're just parts of it that's just so remote it's hard to get to unless you spend days and weeks backpacking in there.
Yep. So is there any current stories that's happened around you, or you've investigated, or somebody else has told you from your area?
Well, I get stories sent to me fairly regularly. I was part of an organization, a Dogman research organization, and we left that group, me and some friends of mine, to kind of start out on our own. But we were taking a lot of accounts in the area. There was, I think, recently there was a Dogman sighting from a vehicle just north of Branson, Missouri, which is about 25 miles from here. There have been Dogman sightings near the old Joe Bald campground. That's where one of my encounters was, down by Kimberling City. There have been Bigfoot sightings near Fellows Lake, which is just like 5 miles from where I'm sitting. There's all kinds of sightings that go on in and around Missouri all the time, and I get sighting encounters sent to me from Texas, Oklahoma. People will email me. People that have seen the show, I'll get an email fairly regularly from somebody who said, "Hey, this is what happened to me when I was young." So we're always getting new encounter stories. I had to kind of get away from getting out in the woods as much as I wanted to. One reason I had to retire from law enforcement is I had a severe back injury, basically took me out, and that happened in early 2020. Um, so my mobility was extremely reduced. It was very difficult for me to get anywhere that I had to hike back into. So I could only go to places that I could, get out of the car and look. Um, but those days are kind of behind me now. I went in and I had a procedure called a spinal ablation done, and that was done a month and a half ago, and
Mm.
I'm now getting my mobility back. My pain level is well, I haven't even taken pain meds in a month. But the that ablation has really done miracles for me. So now that I'm building my endurance back up. I'm starting to walk farther and farther, and we're planning expeditions again. Unfortunately, I was only able to like meet people and talk to them, or talk to people on the phone for the last couple of years. But it looks like summer 2023 is back out on the trail, and I'm really excited to be getting back out into some of the backcountry. Me and the other guys from the DAX Machina crew, we're planning on hitting LBL and Werewolf Springs. I'm going to be appearing at the second annual Dogman Conference in Fort Worth, Texas, in September. So that's going to be a good time. I'll be down there with a bunch of books, and Josh Turner from Paranormal Roundtable is putting that event on. Ken Gerhardt, a lot of big names in cryptozoology are going to be there. So we did the one last year too. It was in Paris, Tennessee, and it was a really good event. A lot of great people there. Got to meet a lot of cool people. But I'm, now that I'm getting my mobility back, we're going to be hitting more of these events. We're going to be going to a lot more places. I'm going to be backpacking into some more places that I couldn't get to anymore. Of course, my youngest son is insisting that I'm not going to keep carrying any weight, because my pain management doctor, she sat me down. She's like, "Look, you're going to feel better, but you're not fixed. This did not fix anything. Your back is still messed up. You just don't feel it." So she said, "You can walk, you can do whatever you need to do, but you are not carrying any heavy weight, and you cannot go back to being a cop, because if you fight the wrong person, you're going to put yourself in a wheelchair." So
Wow.
I can get back out there now. I can do a lot of the things I used to be able to do, but I'll never be able to go back to being a cop or carrying all that weight, because you spend 20 years carrying 50 pounds of duty gear between body armor, gun, and equipment. It takes its toll on your back, and it sure did
Mm.
mine. But I'm happy that ablation was as successful as it was. So it looks like I'm going to be hitting the trail quite a bit, even if I'm still in a somewhat limited carrying capacity. But I can certainly go back in places that I wasn't able to get for the last couple of years.
Well, I'm very happy for you. That's exciting that you're going to be able to go back out there and investigate then and come up with some more stories for us.
I'd definitely be doing that.
It's amazing you're mentioning the conventions you're going to, that when you first became interested in this subject, or even when I did as a kid or growing up, that there wasn't hardly any conventions at all. There was like maybe
Exactly.
one Bigfoot convention, that everybody went to, and that was about it. Now you have all these different cryptid conventions and all over the US, and you got all these venues you can go to now. And you can make some speeches or addresses, be a keynote speaker, and your adventures and stuff that you want to talk to. You get to meet all these different people with all these stories. It's just amazing these days.
I've got to meet some really amazing people on my journey. I mean, along the way, I've met some really awesome people. Ken Gerhardt's a real cool guy. I've met Kenny Irish. Nick Valente, who is a good friend of mine. He lives in New Jersey. He's a big dogman investigator. Really good dude. Absolutely solid guy. Josh Turner, I got to know him. Ron Moorhead, M.K. Davis, just a lot of people, a lot of names that people recognize. I feel really privileged, because I can go, "Hey, yeah, I know that guy," because it was because of not only my research, but my books, that I've got to meet a lot of these amazing people, and I'm happy to call a lot of them friends now.
And also, it's amazing that coming out of this this last pandemic or wherever you want to, I don't want to go into that story, but I mean, it brought everybody online. Everybody's doing
Mhm.
podcasts. I mean,
Mhm.
we would never have had you or even had a show on if we wouldn't have went through that and started searching out YouTubes or Facebook to see what's out there. We've met, William Nighthawk, Dennis,
William's a great guy. Dennis is
Blaz
a
and
great guy.
Booze, Texas
Mhm.
Front Porch, the whole group of them,
Yep, Jessica.
Jessica,
Jessica's
the
awesome.
Cryptid Huntress, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. I mean, we got to know all these people in chat. And then also, we started becoming friends with them and message them. That's like how I got a hold of you to get on the show tonight. It's just amazing that, this
Yeah.
something like that actually brought this out more into the open that everybody can start sharing stories and getting to know each other.
And I think it's great that we're seeing a lot more shows like this than we used
Mhm.
to, because 5 years ago when I was a cop working overnights, there were very few that were worth listening to. There were a lot of YouTube channels that would do Bigfoot stories, but some of them I couldn't listen to them. I mean, they were just the way they talked and the way they presented themselves would just drive me crazy. But there were ones like Cam Buckner from Dixie Cryptid that I used to listen to his a lot, and now Cam and I are friends. I mean, we do projects together. He's actually narrated several of my books and he's working on more. I mean, Cam's just an absolute awesome guy, and I'm really, really happy that I got to get to know him. I'm thrilled to death of the people have been able to meet and get to know through this process. But
Mhm.
shows like this are really what's bringing this community together. Yeah, there are still a lot of people out there that if you don't think the way I think, then I don't want anything to do with you. But I think
Right.
that is becoming less prevalent. The more we can get together, the more we can share ideas. And I tell people this on our show all the time. There are no experts in this field, and anybody that
Mhm.
tries to claim otherwise is selling you something. Uh,
Right.
you know, yeah, I tell people that are in our chat all the time. I said, what we're talking about is just our theories. Any theory you guys have is just as valid 100% as anything we're coming up with because we don't know. And I think the only way we're ever going to really establish what these things are and learn what they are is when we all come together and share the information.
Right.
Uh, I don't. Again, I have no plans to be the guy that brings it home. I don't want to be the guy that solves the mystery. I don't want to shoot one. I don't want the headache involved with being the guy that tries to bring it to light. I will, however, share whatever I know, and I tell people if you got a question and I can help in any way, reach out. I mean, I'm more than happy to tell you anything I know. I'm an open book when it comes to this subject. I'm happy to share what I learn, and I've got a lot of good contacts. I mean, I include y'all of people that I could reach out to and say, hey, I heard this. What have you guys heard? And it's an interesting time in this field because there still are some of the people that will keep everybody at arm's length because you don't think exactly the way I think. But there's a lot more people that are coming together over this, and I hope that's a trend that continues because by networking and sharing our knowledge, we're going to increase the knowledge in general in the field, and eventually have enough firm evidence to get scientists on our side.
Yeah, it's amazing that these shows are popping up, and you're getting a bigger circle of people. Not like you said, not necessarily anybody that's an expert or anything, but to get their experiences or their thoughts and their ideas on the subject, whether they've actually experienced anything or not. And then all of a sudden somebody will say something and that'll put it in my head. Then all of a sudden it's like, man, I wonder if back then when I was in the woods, if that's what that was. I
Right.
mean, it,
Mhm.
it just gives you that little nugget, that little clue of what to look for or something that you may have experienced but didn't know what it was.
Exactly. Well, Robbie Rains, one of my co-hosts, him and I became friends because of one of my books. He
Mhm.
was reading the first book of my Codename Wild Hunt series, and I've done a ton of research in cryptids, and I try to use the behaviors that people have reported or people have observed, like how Bigfoot will sway, you know, and I used that behavior in the book, and that sparked a memory with Robbie, and he reached out to me. He's like, "That happened to me when I was a kid," and
Mhm.
we got to talking over that and became really good friends. And now he's one of my co-hosts. But it's those shared experiences, those behaviors that people have experienced across the country that are giving us these linking elements, that are giving us these shared experiences. Because if we look at an experience from the Pacific Northwest versus the skunk ape versus one out of Maine, and we see patterns of behavior that overlap, then we can start plotting how these things behave. We get outliers where somebody said, oh, it did this, it did this, it did this. But then you start talking about how they'll tree peak, or they'll sway back and forth, shifting their legs. We start finding these across multiple stories, and that allows us to start predicting behavior. And being able, one thing we need to be doing as researchers is not just trying to record the events, but I try to treat my when I take an account, I try to treat it just like I was writing a report when I was a cop. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. I try to answer all those questions. You want to get what time of year it was, the date, what time of day it was, weather conditions, if you can get the weather conditions. And even something I just started doing because of Mike over at Abnormal Investigations, moon phase. Write down the moon phase. Because all of that's becoming more important than we realize. It's allowing us to predict behaviors, and even where they go. When we're starting to see a cluster of sightings in this area, say in August, and then over here it's in October, we're starting to be able to predict, not only where they're at certain times of year, but what they're doing there at that time of year. And those are the things that are going to help to bring this home, because I don't really think they're migrating. I don't think that I don't think that they're they live in Canada in the summer and Florida in the winter. I don't think that that's the case. I think much like mountain lions, I think they have a huge range. If you've got a group of these creatures that are this big, if they stayed in one area, they'd eat everything that there is to eat inside of a month, and probably not even that long. They would completely wipe out anything edible in that one area and have to move on. So very much like how the Native Americans would follow the herds, I think that's what these things are doing. I think that they have a very big range and they follow their food sources. I don't think they stay in any one area for very long, because they would deplete the food. So I think once we can start isolating areas, like let's say they're in Ohio in September, but they're in Missouri in June, we can start looking at where herds have gone, where the elk have moved to, where the deer populations have moved to, and figure out where they're going to be. So you're wanting to do an investigation in October, you pull your history and you look, okay, in October of last year, we got 35 sightings from this area of the United States. We got a very good chance of having an encounter if we go to this area. So I think plotting stuff like that is going to be our best way of being able to get ahead of the research, instead of going out and just reacting to when people have a sighting. We're going to be able to go, okay, this area was a hotbed last October. It is coming up on October. Let's plan a week-long excursion into this area. And I think at that point, we're going to start being able to get better results, because we're staying ahead of them instead of reacting to them.
Right, and it could be just as simple as what you just said. The Indians following the herd. Maybe Sasquatch and Dogmen and other cryptids are following their food source too, and going from area to area within a region. Because I definitely, like you, don't think they migrate necessarily, because it's been a known fact that people have sightings in Canada that are like the larger of the Sasquatch, and that because they live in a bigger wilderness and a much harsher environment than we would here in the southern states or Midwest or wherever you're at.
Well, bears are the perfect example. If you look at the southern part of the United States, primarily what we have are black bears. And if you look at black bears from the East Coast versus black bears from the West Coast, they are the same animal, but there are huge differences in the way they've evolved. But they're both black bears. But you can put two of them side by side and see the differences. They have evolved differently because they're in different parts of the country. Black bears in the lower 48, in the lower part of the United States, they don't get as big. You do get outliers where they'll be 7.5 feet on their hind legs, but for the most part, a black bear here in Missouri, if you see one on its hind legs, 5 foot tall is going to be a good median height. They're not going to be massive. They'll be a couple 100 pounds, maybe 300 or 400 pounds on a big boar. But they're not monsters. They're not going out hunting people. They're not killing people. They're primarily omnivores. They'll eat roots. They'll eat berries. They will eat roadkill, and they have been known to hunt. They'll go after small animals. You get a little farther north, you get into grizzly territory and brown bear territory. They're bigger. They eat way more meat than their smaller cousins in the south. Yeah, they're still omnivores. They'll still eat roots and berries and tear bark off of trees and eat the grubs inside, but they'll also chase down elk and eat them. There are videos out of Alaska of grizzly bear chasing down moose and eating them. So grizzly bears
Oh,
are
wow.
predators. You get farther north into polar bears, 100% predator. They don't hunt for grubs. They don't dig up roots and berries. They hunt. They go after seals. They go after caribou, and they go after the occasional slow person. They are 100% carnivore. They're not interested in roots and berries. They are meat eaters. And I think the farther north you go, you're going to see the same thing with Bigfoot, because the colder climate you're in, the more calories your body has to burn just to stay warm. So they're not getting that calories from blackberries. They're getting those calories from fatty meat.
Yeah, that's just natural selection, just like anything else we experience. And I would assume the cryptids are the same way, just like you described. I mean, you'd have to be to tackle a food source like a bear or an elk. You'd have to be a bigger individual or creature. I don't know. Creature's not really a very good word to describe them. I don't like using that word, but that's why they see 12-foot tall Sasquatch up north in Canada and the higher mountains.
Well, we saw the same thing in the military. I mean, if you've got survival rations for a desert environment, you might only have 14 to 1500 calories a day. But you look at cold weather rations. Cold weather rations are 6,000 to 7,000 calories a meal because your body has to have it to stay warm. And that's just basic physics. Dennis is absolutely right. They are 100% adapted for survival. They are the masters of their territory. And for us to not take that seriously and understand this is what you're up against, you're doing yourself a disservice. You've got to go with that knowledge in your head that they are going to be better at us at literally everything when it comes to survival in the wilderness.
And the other thing I was thinking of when you were saying, about migration and stuff, it doesn't even necessarily have to be anything like following a herd of migration. You could have an outlier from, say, a family of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Dogman that gets kicked out of the group and they have to fend for themselves or on their own for whatever reason they got kicked out of their family group. They could wander off all of a sudden in a new territory that you didn't see or spot one before.
Well, those are the dangerous ones. I think the ones that have been kicked out of their clan for whatever reason. I think those are the real ones that are really dangerous because they don't have the rest of the clan to support as a support system. They've got to do all their own hunting, their own gathering, and predators. We've talked about this on our show a number of times. It's risk versus reward with big predators. Big predators will not go after something that's going to cause too much risk of them getting hurt, because it's not like they can pop down to the ER and get stitched up. A nasty bleeding wound to a large predator is generally a death sentence. It gets infected and they're done. So they're going to weigh their meal chances about how much energy it's going to take to put out to get it, and how much risk there is involved. If they're going to go after something that might kill them, they're probably going to look for an easier meal. And when you got these creatures that are solo, they are going to look for an easy meal. And if you're out in the woods, and if you're a dog man and you're hungry and you need to eat, and it's been a while since you've had a good meal, and you look two directions down a trail and you see a whitetail buck running at 40 miles an hour down one direction, and you got another guy listening to an iPod and wearing Birkenstock sandals, he's probably going to go, I'm going to bet that guy can't run 40 mile an hour.
Yep. So the old saying,
Wonder how
you
that
don't
guy
have to be
tastes.
the fastest, you just don't want to be the slowest.
That's right.
So is there a story that you can share with us as far as a real experience, not necessarily your own, but a story that you could just go ahead and go in detail, and then we'll go from there and see how much longer we'll keep this going. I mean,
Sure.
I'm sorry to the chat tonight because I've been so enthralled in talking to you and listening
Yeah.
to stories that I haven't
Fair.
hardly been able to focus on them at all. So I'm sorry, everybody, that I've missed.
I've had a lot of close encounters what I call near sightings with Bigfoot, that I
Mhm.
know that's all it could have been, but I didn't actually see it. But I have seen a dog man with my own eyes, and it was an LBL. Be 2 years ago this July. Nick Valente and I were in LBL. We spent about a week in LBL back in 2021, in July of 2021, and we were looking for the infamous kill site, the campground where the family of four was murdered. And then later, I found out that a guy from the Department of Game and Fish had seen a couple killed in a campground, literally about 300 yards from where we had our sighting. We were near an area called Demumbers Bay, and we'd been in LBL for several days already. And what we were doing was we'd gone down to Demumbers Bay and we're circling back, and we were looking back in the woods for primitive campsites because LBL is littered with primitive campsites. In fact, I don't know any place where you've got like RV hookups and stuff. All the campsites I've ever gone to were all primitive. There are places where you park your camper, but not a whole lot of places where you could hook up to electricity. Pretty much a primitive campsite, and I know you guys are familiar with that. But anybody that's in the audience that doesn't know what a primitive campsite is, it's basically where you've got to pack everything in. There's no amenities, there's no water, there's no electricity. Everything you need, you've got to bring in with you. And that's what we were doing is we were looking at some of these primitive campsites, and because some of them you can see from the road, they're 40, 50 yards back in the trees, and we would see tents and stuff where people were camping. But what we were looking for is empty primitive campsites where we could go and look for tracks and things like that. And we were also keeping half an eye out, looking to maybe see if we find one that was tore up. So that was something we were kind of keeping at the foreground of our mind. But as we're driving down, there's an area near Demumbers Bay and LBL where there's this kind of earthen bridge. You got water on both sides of the road, and it's like a berm with culverts that go through it. And back to one direction is like this slough that goes back into the trees, and the other part goes back out into the lake. Um, and that's just down the road from the campground at Demumbers Bay. But we just crossed that little narrow bridge, and we're getting back into the trees on the other side. And we're driving. We're on the road. We're doing 3 or 4 miles an hour at the most, just creeping along. And Nick was looking on the left side of the road for those campsites, and I was looking on the right. And as we passed the section, I just kind of panning the trees looking for this and looking for those campsites, and I saw a figure next to a tree, but it was just a dark figure, and it was broad daylight. It's like 10:30 in the morning, and my brain didn't really click what I was seeing. I just kind of passed over it, and as I was starting to turn my head, it turned its head, and when it moved, that's just like deer hunting. My mind locked on a laser focused on that movement, and I looked right back at it. And of course, at this point, I'm like hitting Nick in the shoulder as hard as I can hit him. I'm like, stop! And he hits the brakes and turns and looks. And what I saw was a creature that was between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. It wasn't massive, but it was well proportioned. It was well built. It was completely black, 100% black. It had a head kind of like a wolf, but the snout was shorter and broader, almost like a mastiff. But the head looked very much like a wolf. It was completely black. It was standing on its hind legs. It had its right hand on the trunk of this tree. And of course, when it realized we were looking at it, and I saw it for 15 to 20 seconds, and Nick saw it for probably around 10 by the time I got him to stop and look. Once it realized that I was looking at it, it turned and headed for like this little ravine that dipped down toward the lake, and it did this weird bounding run. It didn't just like we would do. It jumped to one side, jumped to the other side, and then jumped to the other side, just kind of back, forth, and in 3 bounds it had covered about 40, 50 meters and went down in that ravine. Of course, we jump out of the vehicle and go trucking out there, and the leaf litter was so thick on the ground we could see the impressions of where it was, but there were no tracks. It was too much leaf litter for it to have left tracks. And we can hear, we were definitely near a water source, Dennis. We were right there in the middle of LBL. There's lakes on both sides of us. But we can hear this thing going down through the trees like a freight train. And there was no way we were getting down in that ravine without ropes. And of course, neither of us were armed at the moment. We're like, hey, well, this is probably not the greatest idea we've ever had, chasing this thing into the woods. So I go back over to the tree where I saw it, and I was able to put my hand where its hand was without really sticking it too terribly high above my head. And I'm 5'10". So I estimated it to between 6.5 and 7 feet tall, probably closer to 6.5. It wasn't massive, but from where it had its hand on the tree, I could comfortably put my hand on it without reaching way up to touch it. So it wasn't a whole lot taller than me. It had a thick, bushy tail. It, of course, had the digitigrade feet, the dog-like back legs, and it was incredibly fast. And I don't remember seeing any color to its eyes. I don't remember seeing any color in its mouth. The figure I saw was 100% black, and it moved just wicked fast.
Now, did you get an evil presence or a sense to it at all?
Not at all. I didn't even notice it was there until it moved. We didn't have that, that weird feeling, but there were a number of places in LBL. I got there before Nick. I was there a couple of days before Nick got there, and I went around to some of the places in LBL. Later, I was told by a number of people that are familiar with the area that I was not the brightest bulb in the pack for going in by myself, but I did. I went into a lot of places, even in the dead of night, completely by myself, and probably not the smartest thing I've ever done. I went down to Demumbers Bay and played a predator call and on my phone. And noise, especially at night, noise travels weird over water. And I was right on the shore of the lake, and I could hear something coming toward me from 3 different directions. And I was like, would you look at the time? It's time I get my ass back in the van.
I gotta go.
Yeah, what am I doing down here? I'm out here. Nobody knows where I'm at. I have no cell phone signal, and I'm not armed. Probably not the best place I could be doing this.
It sounds like Robbie and Jessica's story. They're kind of getting surrounded, like, okay, time to go.
Yeah. Would you look at the time?
Yeah.
Now, do you have a theory on the LBL why people keep saying they get the eerie feeling and the evil presence when they go to the LBL when they're doing investigations?
There's a lot going on in LBL. And I think it has more than just cryptids. That place is littered with old graveyards. It is. You can't throw a rock without hitting an old graveyard in LBL. They're everywhere.
Wow.
I think that area has had, well, even the Native Americans, before it was known as the Land Between the Lakes. It wasn't known as Land Between the Lakes until 1963 when the Tennessee Valley Authority built those 2 dams. Lake Kentucky and Lake Barkley, Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley. When they dammed those 2 rivers, they turned that area into Land Between the Lakes. But before then, it was known as the Land Between the Rivers. And dating back to the late 1600s, that area was known by French trappers as being a haunted land. They would report what they referred to as the loup-garou, which is the French werewolf. French trappers in the late 1600s reported seeing wolf-like creatures in that area, hundreds of years before LBL was a thing. The Native Americans said that land was cursed. They didn't live there. They would hunt there, but they didn't live there. It wasn't until that area was settled and people started having some pretty violent encounters with these things. I think part of the reason that it is the epicenter that it is today is I think the government became aware those things were there, and when they built those 2 dams and created the Land Between the Lakes area, they went in and they kicked everybody off their land. That is all government land now. Those cemeteries are still there, but they booted a lot of people off their land. There's still ruins of old farmsteads and even some old buildings like the place they call Hotel California. There are a lot of places out there that are just ruins of buildings that are just in the middle of the woods. So they kicked a lot of people off their land to create that area. And I think they did that intentionally. I think, they could have left people on their land, even with lakes on either side of them. But they much like the national parks, I think they were trying to create an area where they could contain these things to try to keep them out and keep them, in that one area and keep them from bothering people in other areas. Now, when I was in LBL, the town right across the canal from LBL is called Grand Rivers. And I talked to a lot of people in Grand Rivers about what was going on in LBL. And for the most part in Grand Rivers, They either refused to talk about it or got pissed off when I brought it up. I got kicked out of a bait store for bringing it up. Guys like, get out, just
Wow.
get out. I identified myself as a retired cop and was talking to a deputy in that area, and I met him there in Grand Rivers. And I identified who I was, told him I was researching a book, and asked about the incident in LBL. And he goes, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "Cop to cop, drop it." And he walked off, and he wouldn't talk to me
Oh,
about it anymore. Nobody in Grand
oh,
Rivers would talk about it. But when we got to Paducah, Kentucky, which is about 10 miles away, there were people that were just, you know, unsolicited. Were like, "Hey, you're asking about, Dogman
Oh,
stories? Well, I've
wow.
got one for you."
wow.
One of the best ones that I got was from a guy I met at a barbecue place there in Paducah. He said that he was fishing. It was right at dusk. He was fishing along the Kentucky lakeside, and he was kind of, letting his trolling motor take him back into this little slough. And he looked up, and he said there was this. He said it looked like a werewolf. He said it was on two legs. It was sitting at the edge of the water like it was cleaning something. And he said when it saw me, it came out in the water at the boat. He said it was
Hmm.
trying to get to me in the boat. He said and it was way closer than I wanted it to be. I didn't see it until I was like 20 yards away from it. He said, and he said at that point I cut the trolling motor, fired the big engine up, and got the hell out of there. He says I won't fish that side of the lake now when it gets close to dark.
Wow.
Hmm.
That's
He said
crazy.
he said that thing had every intention of getting in the boat with him.
Now, I was kind of wondering, even before you even said corralling them in between the two lakes, I was wondering if maybe they got trapped in there after they disturbed their land or something and forced them in the middle. You
I
know,
don't think that it was a case of them getting trapped, because the area was surrounded by rivers before, and we all know bears and all kinds of animals will cross rivers, especially at shallow points. But when they built those two dams, those lakes would have filled so slowly. They would have had to have armed guards basically elbow to elbow just to keep them in that area.
right.
It would have taken months or even years for those lakes to fill to modern levels. So those things would have easily been able to get in and out. And even now, I mean, we get reports of Bigfoot swimming. Those
Hmm.
lakes aren't massive. They are big lakes. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like swimming across Lake Superior. I mean, you can see the other side from and if these things are strong swimmers, I can see how they could easily swim across. And there are places like right by the canal, which is very narrow. I mean, I'm not a great swimmer, but I can swim across the canal, I'm pretty sure.
Is there a legend on what caused the curse originally?
I've heard multiple stories. There was supposedly, in one version of the story, there was a medicine man who basically went dark, who started
Mm.
killing his own tribe, and they cursed him to be locked in this wolf form and banished him to that land.
Hmm.
There are others that say witchcraft is involved. There are a lot of stories that float around about the origin of what first cursed the land at LBL. But they do mention the curse going back at least 200 or 300 years.
Wow.
Now, I was kind of curious, and I don't know if I've looked it up before, not about ley lines and stuff being in the LBL. Is there a conjunction of multiple events or ley lines that go through that land also?
I've never checked on whether or not there are ley lines in that area, but we have noticed that there's a really good pattern among cryptids, that they always seem to be near water. And even before there were lakes there were two very large rivers right there in that area with that strip of land between the two. So, an area in fertile ground that's between two large rivers is going to have plenty of game. And I think that's probably what attracted them to that area in the first place.
Hmm.
Wow.
But I'll tell you
Yeah, that would,
something really weird about LBL. Again, granted, there's a lot of stories of people going missing and even stories of people being killed in LBL. But this is just personal observation. I've grown up in and around the woods, especially in the Ozarks, my whole life. I've hunted pretty much everything you can legally hunt in North America. Um, so I've spent a lot of my fair share of time in the woods. I know what the woods feel like. LBL was different. It felt like no other place I'd ever been. And
Mm.
on the way to LBL, driving through Kentucky, and even right across the canal in Grand Rivers, we stayed at a resort there in Grand Rivers, and there were deer and possums and pretty much, raccoons, every animal you can imagine. We saw wandering around that resort. There in Grand Rivers, you would see deer and all kinds of animals. See raccoons raiding trash cans. I mean, they were animals everywhere. You get into North LBL, nothing.
Wow.
In almost a week in Northern LBL, I didn't see a single animal, not one, not
Wow.
even roadkill.
They know.
So that tells you there's something there that even the animals don't want to go near.
Right.
Wow.
And the canal is only maybe 50 to 75 yards wide at its widest point. It's not massive. So it's very easy that deer could cross that canal to go over there where there's plenty of vegetation, and there were tons of deer right there in Grand Rivers, but I didn't see a single one once you cross that canal into North LBL. Not one.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
Well, this has been a very interesting night. I really have enjoyed this talk with you. I mean, we could go longer, but I think we went pretty long now, and maybe we can have a part 2 some other time.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Mhm.
You can go ahead and mention your show and your books and stuff and your information, and even give a shout out to your teams if you want.
Will do. I'm part of the group over at DAX Machina. We're on every Wednesday and Saturday night at 8 p.m. Central. My co-hosts are Steve Monrotis, Anthony Canatella, Robbie Rains, and Kerry Pocket Dog Davis. Great group of guys, just absolute hoot to hang around with. We do the same thing we were doing here. We just talk cryptids, and it's kind of a relaxed atmosphere where everybody just sits around and talks. It's not, there's no big structured, like news television documentary. It's just folks talking about events and having a good conversation about it. It's not intended to be something very formal. It was always intended to be like people sitting around a campfire talking. So I hope you'll check us out at DAX Machina every Wednesday and Saturday night at 8 p.m. And if you like cryptid related stories, and granted, I do write fiction, they're horror stories. It's something I've always enjoyed writing. But my books are fiction, and I do have some nonfiction books in the works. We're going to be doing a couple of cryptid guidebooks coming out in the next couple of years. But at the moment, all my books are fiction. There's 29 currently print. If you like books with cryptids and a lot of action, I think you'll enjoy those. The newest one is called Dark Frontier First Hunt. That's a mouthful to spit out at once. It's set in 1865. But I have other series that are more set in modern times. And you can check all of those out at daroberts.net. They're all available on Amazon and through my website, again, daroberts.net. And if you'd like to read some of the unpublished short stories and things that have not been released to the public, you can go over and check those out at patreon.com/darobertsauthor and become part of the Patreon community and read short stories before they ever appear anywhere else. So hopefully you guys will see you on the show, and thank you guys for having me on. I had a great time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on. You're just like Dennis. You're just a wealth of information, and we enjoyed every single story you told. Like I said, I lost track of chat because I was so enthralled and didn't want to miss anything of your stories.
I'm glad I could help. I'm glad I could help. I mean, my wife will tell you, well, you get me wound up on cryptids, and I'll talk for hours.
Well, you have a good night, and we'll be sure to talk to you, stay in touch, and we'll get you back on again for a part 2.
Absolutely. Just let me know. Thank you for having me on.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Well, that was very good. I enjoyed that tremendously.
That was great.
I really wasn't sure how much I'd be able to input, and obviously I didn't really have to very much. He was just a wealth of information and just awesome.
That was wonderful. Oh, and thank you everyone for showing up in our chats. And can't see every single one of them. You can see all of them, but I really appreciate everyone showing up and listening to DA. I would love to have him back. His stories are amazing. He could just go on for hours telling stories.
Yeah, I kind of felt bad that he was talking all the time and having to take drinks because we probably weren't filling our share of the stories.
Yeah.
I was just so enthralled with all the information he had and experiences that you just kind of sit back just like you're watching a TV show, like a documentary. You're just sitting there watching.
Oh, just so relaxing, and we're all laid back. So this was a very wonderful show. I'm glad everyone showed up. And we will let everyone know next time we are on.
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell them about what you're going to be doing here coming up before we get out of
Okay.
here.
Yeah, I will be on Nana Boss, which is Marty's show, April 25th. And I'll be talking about singing bowls and the healing effect and see where it goes from there. We could probably get into cryptids. Who knows what that show is going to be? It's going to be a really good time. That will be April 25th.
Awesome. Then besides William Nighthawk and Dennis Carroll, that they've allowed me to join them on their shows on the weekends and Friday nights, and I try to jump in whenever I can. Like I said, I don't know if I really add very much to the show or not. I try
Oh,
to.
yeah. You
I mean,
are.
I have my own theories and interject stuff once in a while, but just like that, Dennis gets talking, and I just love hearing his stories and his theories on everything. I mean, he's been investigating for 55 years, just like DA's been investigating all these years into stuff. I don't really have that much experience investigating and stuff, but I've been reading stories and watching stuff my whole life, and
Mhm.
thought this would be a great interest for both of us to get into the fields and get to know people and bring on people that we already met and know that have a lot more interest and ideas than we do and experiences. And coming up, I'll be on Texas Front Porch with Tex, and I'm probably pretty sure that Blondes and Booze or Bigfoot Michigan Rob will probably be on there with them. I'm not really sure which one, but you never know which one's going to pop on at any time during the show. And
Yeah, that's the 24th.
the
Yeah, you're
24th,
on.
it'll be a
Yeah,
Monday coming up here in this month, and
yeah,
that'll
you're
be
on
a good
Monday.
time for me and get on there and tell some of our stories, the UFOs, and a couple of the experiences that we're not really sure what they were or what they are, but talking to all these people, I kind of have an idea, whether it was a Sasquatch
Mhm.
or we had fairy tales, fairy folk, fae coming in our property here, and who knows what we'll hit on. Reading chat.
Yeah, yeah, we got more people coming in chat. Yeah, I just like everyone experiencing their own, just sharing stories. That's where I'll get to it. Everyone's sharing their stories and experiences, and nobody's judging each other. And you can find a community that you can finally open up and say, "Yeah, I've had this weird, strange experience," and you don't have someone looking at you like you're crazy. I just really enjoy listening to all these different stories. And might make someone else open up, like me. A year ago, I wouldn't be on live YouTube talking about my experiences, but I feel like it's time that we need to open up and be comfortable and share our experiences and get all these stories out there and everyone compare, that something is going on. People are seeing things and might have someone else finally open up and get a healing, just to share with someone that their experience that they've kept quiet all these years.
And you'll have to let us know, in chat or send us an email. You can reach us at MidwestNightWatchers@gmail.com. And if you have experiences or you have ideas or even opinions of what we talked about tonight, be sure to leave them in chat or send them an email, and we'll reach out to you. And who knows, maybe you guys will start your own podcast just like we did. That's how we started. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll get you on here some night or some afternoon. And we haven't really set a exact time yet, but we got
Yep.
plans on adding some more shows since William Nighthawk and Dennis has opened up their platform to us. I think Chiro is going to start a sound and therapy channel, possibly. We'll have some shows on that where she'll be the leader, and I'll just follow with her to help guide along and maybe a little input. And she'll talk into frequencies and singing bowls and music and healing. And what else would you want to talk about on that?
Well, like you said, just what hurts means and the different hurts and the effects that it has on the bodies, and just meditation and help people sleep. It will help with depression. There's just so much that music actually does, not just to our minds, but to our bodies itself.
So we can get into the frequencies and how they've changed the frequencies, and historically, temples and churches have been for healing, for music, and for the frequencies to act on the body, and they've taken that away from us.
Right.
But then we're going to probably go back to having Midwest Night Watchers, the night owl session. We might do some late at night on there and have that as a separate little channel or on a Williams platform. And so we might have 2 or 3 going at one time, and hopefully we'll be able to get that going. And that's about all that's going to come in the horizon, other than we're going to be out in the backyard again a lot now that the weather's going to ready to turn nice again once we get past this little cold spell they just hit us with. So we'll be showing you some more videos from the night sky and anything what we find, or just a campfire and us talking. We don't know yet. Who knows what direction it'll go to.
We don't need a direction. We're just going to go as the flow. We'll pop on surprisingly without a schedule. Who knows? Can't rely on us.
Well, everybody, I think we're going to end it right here. It's been fun. We've enjoyed having you all in our chat. And again, I'll say DA was fun to be here with, talking to. And it wasn't necessarily an interview. I just considered him a friend. And we're just sitting here chatting, having a good time, and just watch the time just roll away. So we'll just end it with that and say good night to everybody, or good afternoon. I don't even know what time it is. And we'll see you the next time.
Thank you for joining us.